Welcome to BeFM Drama, where we turn great works of English literature into gripping radio. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and this week we're bringing you our 5-part adaptation of The Adventure of Charles Augustus Milverton, a classic Sherlock Holmes detective story from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In part 2 of our program, Holmes continues to face off against Mr. Milverton, a cold-hearted professional blackmailer who is threatening Holmes's client with the release of highly embarrassing letters she once wrote to an old romantic interest. If the detective's client refuses to pay Milverton a ridiculous sum of money, the letters will be sent to her powerful fiancé, and her fast-approaching wedding will be called off in disgrace. This social ruin is a fate almost worse than death in the deeply reputation-obsessed world of Victorian England, and would destroy the woman's life. Join us now as we return to the story, and Sherlock Holmes does his best to argue for agreeable terms with a professional and most underhanded master criminal. As Milverton turned back towards us with a snake-like look of victory in his eyes, Holmes turned almost gray with anger and mortification. I had seldom seen him in such a state, and I knew that giving way to such a man pained him dearly. Softly, he repeated his plea.
Oh, wait a little longer. You go too fast. We should certainly make every effort to avoid a scandal in so delicate a matter.
Milverton eased himself back into his chair and spoke with something like a purr.
I was sure that you would see it in that light.
But you must understand that Lady Ava is not a wealthy woman. I assure you that £2,000 would be a drain upon her resources, and that the sum of 7,000 you name is utterly beyond her power. I beg, therefore, that you will moderate your demands, and that you will return the letters for the price of 2,000, which is, I assure you, the highest that you can get.
Milverton's smile broadened, and his eyes twinkled humorously.
I'm aware that what you say is true about the lady's financial resources. At the same time, you must admit that the occasion of a lady's marriage is a very suitable time for her friends and relatives to make a little extra effort on her behalf. They may yet be undecided on an appropriate wedding present, but I could assure them that this little bundle of letters would give the bride more joy than all the candelabras and the butter dishes in London.
I assure you that this sum is impossible for her.
Dear me, how unfortunate.
Milverton pulled out a bulky pocketbook.
I cannot help thinking that ladies are often ill-advised in not making an effort. Look at this.
He held up a little note with a coat of arms upon the envelope.
That belongs to, well, perhaps it is hardly fair to say her name before tomorrow morning. By that time, it will be in the hands of a lady's husband. And all because she could not find a beggarly little sum she might have gotten by turning her diamonds into paste. Is it not pitiful? And here I find you, a man of sense, waffling about terms when your client's future and honor are at stake. You surprise me, Mr. Holmes.
What I say is true. The money cannot be found. Surely it is better to take the substantial sum which I offer than to ruin this woman's career, which can profit you in no way.
There you make a mistake, Mr. Holmes. A public exposure would profit me indirectly to a considerable extent. I have 8 or 10 similar cases maturing. If the news was circulated among them that I had made such a severe example of the Lady Ava, I should find them all much more open to reason. You see my point?
Holmes sprang from his chair.
Get behind him, Watson. Don't let him out. Now, sir, let us see the contents of that notebook.
Milverton glided as quick as a rat to the side of the room and stood with his back against the wall, where he gently drew back the front of his coat to reveal the butt of a large revolver protruding from his inside pocket.
Mr. Holmes, I expected you to do something original. I assure you that I am armed to the teeth, and I am perfectly prepared to use my weapons, knowing I have the law behind me. Our books are very clear on self-defense. Besides, your assumption that I would bring the letters here in a notebook is entirely mistaken. I would do nothing so foolish. And now, gentlemen, I have 1 or 2 more little interviews this evening, and it is a long drive to Hampstead.
He stepped forward, took up his coat, laid his hand on his revolver, and turned to the door. I picked up a chair to strike him, but Holmes shook his head, and I laid it down again. With a bow, a smile, and a twinkle, Milverton was out of the room, and a few minutes later, we heard the slam of the carriage door and the rattle of the wheels as he drove away. Holmes sat motionless by the fire. For half an hour, he was silent and still. Then, with the gesture of a man who has made his decision, he sprang to his feet and walked into his bedroom. A little while later, a rakish young workman, with a goatee beard and a swagger in his step, lit his clay pipe at the lamp and spoke briefly to me before descending into the street.
"I'll be back sometime, Watson."
With that, my disguised friend vanished into the night. I understood that he had begun his campaign against Charles Augustus Milverton, but I little dreamed the strange shape which that campaign was destined to take. For some days, Holmes came and went at all hours in his disguise, but beyond a remark that his time was spent at Hampstead and not wasted, I knew nothing of what he was doing. At last, however, on a wild, tempestuous, stormy evening, when the wind screamed and rattled against the windows, he returned from his last expedition. At last, removing his disguise, he sat before the fire and laughed heartily in his inward fashion.
"Would you call me a marrying man, Watson?"
No, indeed.
"Then you'll be interested to hear that I'm engaged."
My dear fellow, I congratulate...
"To Milverton's housemaid."
Good heavens, Holmes.
"I wanted information, Watson."
Surely you have gone too far.
It was a most necessary step. I am a plumber with a rising business, you see, Escott by name. I've walked with her each evening, and I've talked with her. Good heavens, those talks. However, I've gotten all I wanted. I know Milverton's house as I know the palm of my hand.
But the girl, Holmes...
You can't help it, my dear Watson. You must play your cards as best you can. However, I rejoice to say that I have a hated rival in love who will certainly cut me out the instant that my back is turned and offer the girl his own hand in matrimony. What a splendid night it is.
You like this weather?
It suits my purpose. Watson, I mean to burgle Milverton's house tonight.
I caught my breath, and my skin went cold at the words. As a flash of lightning in the night shows up at an instant every detail of a wild landscape, so at one glance I seemed to see every possible bad result of such an action. I cried out in dismay. For heaven's sake, Holmes, think what you are doing.
My dear fellow, I have given it every consideration. I am never hasty in my actions, nor would I adopt so energetic and indeed dangerous a course of action if any other were possible. Let us look at the matter clearly and calmly. I suspect that you'll admit that the action is morally justifiable, although technically criminal. To burgle his house is no more than to forcibly take his pocketbook, an action in which you were prepared to aid me just a few days ago.
Yes, it is morally justifiable, as long as our goal is to take no items except those which are being used for an illegal purpose.
Exactly. And since it is morally justifiable, I've only to consider the question of personal risk. Surely a gentleman should not put much importance on his own safety when a lady is in desperate need of his help.
But you will be in such an exposed position.
Well, that is part of the risk. There's no other possible way of regaining these letters. The unfortunate lady does not have the money, and there are none in her family to whom she could confide her secret. Tomorrow is her last day of grace, and unless we can get the letters tonight, this villain will be as good as his word and bring about her ruin. I must therefore either abandon my client to her fate or play this last card. Between ourselves, Watson, it's a sporting duel between this fellow Milverton and I. He was, as you saw, the victor of our first exchanges, but my self-respect and reputation are now staked on fighting this through to a finish.
Well, I don't like it, but I suppose it must be. When do we start?
You are not coming.
Then you are not going. I give you my word of honor, and I have never broken it in my life, that I will take a cab straight to the police station and give you away, unless you let me share this adventure with you. Having failed to reason with Mr. Milverton, Holmes has opted for a far more dramatic course of action. A late-night break-in at the blackmailer's tightly controlled estate in Hampstead. The first time that the legendary detective has ever moved to intentionally break the law in service of a client. The horrified Dr. Watson insists on joining his friend on this perhaps misguided criminal enterprise. But you'll have to join us again here on BeFM Drama tomorrow night to see how their attempt unfolds. From our studio in Busan, this is your host, Joshua Cornwell.